The year is 1238, and the Mongol horde has swept across Eastern Europe with unstoppable force. One small Russian principality stands defiant against their mighty war machine. Today we are returning to Eastern Europe for the first time since our video on the Battle of the Kalka River, where we saw the Mongols score a decisive victory over the Russians and Polovtsia. It was a crushing defeat and showed that no army in Europe could match the speed and ferocity of the Mongol horsemen. In fact, the only thing that could stop them was the weather. As the Mongol armies approached, the citizens of Kozelsk fled to the nearby forest to avoid capture or worse. While he was only 12 years old, he was actually quite a capable commander and refused to bow to the Mongol demands. Every attack was beaten back, and the Mongols soon realized they would have to do something more drastic if they wanted to take the city. As soon as spring came around, the city's defenders went on the counter. Under the leadership of Prince Mstislav, the citizens of Kozelsk launched repeated attacks against the Mongol garrison, pushing them closer and closer to the river. The Mongols had finally taken the city, but their victory was costly, and it was clear that the Russians were not going to give up. The siege of Kozelsk had taught them that taking cities was not going to be easy, and the Russians were prepared. The Mongols had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of flexibility and adapting to changing circumstances. This change in tactics would help them to conquer much of Russia without having to waste time and resources on lengthy sieges. By 1238, the Mongols had already conquered much of Central Asia and Eastern Europe, and their sights were set on expanding their empire even further. They had heard tales of the riches of the Russian principalities and wanted to claim them for themselves, so they began a campaign to conquer the area. This made them a formidable opponent, because they were able to wear down the defenders of a city and force them to surrender. The Mongols were confident that they would be able to take the city quickly. However, they soon found out that the city's defenders were well prepared. The city was surrounded by high walls, and the defenders had plenty of food and supplies. The Mongols tried to break through the city walls, but they were unsuccessful. However, the Mongols were not used to fighting in the winter. Eventually, the Mongols were forced to lift the siege and retreat to their camp. This was a major victory for the defenders of Kozelsk, and it showed the Mongols that they were not invincible. They had to retreat and lick their wounds, and it showed them that they were not invincible. The Mongols would go on to conquer much of Russia eventually, but they never forgot the lessons they learned at the siege of Kozelsk. They had a difficult time keeping their supplies and equipment in good condition, and often had to retreat when the weather turned cold. They had to live under the constant threat of Mongol attack, and they were forced to ration their food and supplies. However, they were able to hold out, and ultimately their bravery was rewarded. Seeing how stubborn the Russians were, the Mongols changed their tactics, and so the siege of Kozelsk began. To understand why the siege was so important, it's important to know a little bit about the Mongol army. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Mongols would have been successful if they had taken Kozelsk? What other battles should I cover in the future? Have a great day, and see you in the next video. Bye! The Mongols were a nomadic people who lived in tents and traveled with their herds of animals. They were expert horsemen and archers and were used to fighting on the open battlefield. Instead of trying to besiege every city they came across, they built new cities of their own, which then became bases of operations to launch raids into the surrounding countryside. And so the Mongols would have to keep fighting if they wanted to conquer Russia. But the Mongol reinforcements arrived and rescued the beleaguered garrison. It was thanks to his leadership that the city was able to hold out for as long as it did. But why were the Mongols attacking Kozelsk in the first place? Once again, the Mongols prepared for another long siege. But before they could do anything else, winter came early that year, forcing the Mongols to abandon their siege and return to Mongolia. For the next 10 months, the Mongols attacked the city day and night, but they were unable to break through the city walls. The citizens of Kozelsk fought bravely, defending their homes and families from the Mongol invaders. Finally, after 10 months, the Mongol army broke through the city walls and took the city by storm. He was determined to defend his city and protect the people who lived there. When the Mongols heard that the city's defenders were refusing to surrender, they immediately began their attack. However, they soon realized that taking the city was going to be much harder than they thought. However, they left behind a garrison of about 600 men led by the 12-year-old prince. With the rest of the population gone, the Mongols assumed the city would fall without a fight. They sent word to the people inside demanding they surrender the city and allow the Mongols to plunder it. However, they got much more than they bargained for. As the Mongols advanced further into Slavic lands, the cold winters proved to be an obstacle they couldn't overcome, and so for now, the Mongol advance would be halted. But this would not last long. Can they survive the coming storm, or will their courage be in vain? This is the story of Kozelsk. But what makes today's battle so interesting is that it was one of the longest sieges in medieval history, and the Mongols were forced to lay siege to a town twice, as well as facing a very unique enemy. The Mongols faced staunch resistance at every step of their advance into Eastern Europe, but nowhere was this more apparent than at the city of Kozelsk. Welcome back to the channel. And stop the Mongol advance. By 1238, the Russians had decided to adopt a different strategy. Instead of trying to fight the Mongols in the open field, they would hide in their cities. The Mongol army was strong, but their siege capabilities were limited. So, by hiding in their fortified towns, the Russians thought they could stall out the Mongols. The Mongols weren't having it though and laid siege to many of these towns, including the important city of Vladimir. In just a few years, the Mongol war machine would kick into action once again and steamroll all opposition. While the Battle of the Kalka River had seen a coalition of Russian princes team up with the Pelovsian cavalry to try. But the Mongol army wasn't the only one on the move. Prince Mstislav was not willing to surrender his city. The Mongols tried their standard siege tactics, building towers and catapults to batter the city walls. But the defenders of Kozelsk were ready for them. During their retreat, they left a garrison behind to keep the city under siege. But even this didn't work, and so it began. However, this did not come without great cost. Many of the defenders were killed in the fighting, and those who survived were taken captive by the Mongols. As the Mongols moved deeper into Russia, they found that each city was more heavily defended than the last. This allowed them to capture large amounts of territory without having to worry about defending it. It is hard to imagine how such a young person could be so brave and resourceful, but that is exactly what happened at the siege of Kazan. Well, the answer lies in the ambitions of the Mongol Empire. But the Mongols quickly found out that the Russians were not going to give up their land without a fight. They were also very patient and disciplined and were willing to lay siege to a city for months if necessary. So what happened when the Mongols laid siege to the city of Kazan? The Mongols were not used to fighting in the winter weather, and they soon began to lose men to cold exposure and starvation. For the residents of Kozelsk, the siege was a terrifying experience. In the end, the siege of Kozelsk was a costly victory for the Mongols. Meanwhile, the people of Kozelsk were able to rebuild their city and continue to resist the Mongol invaders.